So we're here with Dr. Lawrence Harkless, and he's going to give us a little history about his humble beginnings in Tatum, Texas, about his family, and also about how he got inspired to be a doctor. Okay, so Dr. Larry, tell us about yourself.
Well, I was born in Longview, Texas. That's Grant County, and that's in northeast Texas, about 50 miles west of Shreveport, Louisiana, and about 120 miles east of Dallas on Interstate 20. And if you leave Dallas, Interstate 30 and 20 are running parallel. 30 is a little bit north, goes to Texarkana, and 20 goes to Shreveport, Jackson, Birmingham, Atlanta, and so that's that particular route. Tatum is the little town where I grew up, but I actually grew up on a farm. Tatum is in Rusk County, and that's where all the oil started. It started in Texas, the Spindletop oil well, etc. And that's in West Rusk, Kilgore, but that's part of Rusk County where I grew up. And Longview was the industrial center of northeast Texas. When I was growing up, it was about 40,000. And industry-wise, they had Eastman Kodak, Continental Can, major corporations had factories, and so people would drive, 40, 50, 60 miles to Longview to work every day. And Northeast Texas was a very highly populated with African Americans, primarily rural, and they were farmers. They had land, and back then most of them had quite a few kids, and probably for that they had to have manpower to work the farm. And so my father was one of three kids, and he had a sister and a brother, and his father was a farmer. My grandmother and grandfather were farmers, and so his my grandfather and his brother had bought land, and then they shared the farm together. And my grandfather died when Dad was about 15, and I was told that he lost his arm from diabetes. However, in 2015, I was going through some paperwork at my mother's, and I ran up on his death certificate, and he actually died of a below-knee amputation. He actually had an amputation on June the 24th, 1939, and he actually died 2 days later on the 26th. So I don't know how Daddy got that wrong, but that really wasn't correct. But my grandmother was a farmer, and she had a store, so she was really an entrepreneur in her own right, and was really involved in the church. She was like a mother usher of Texas, and she was very, very outgoing. She was from 16 kids, and her father was half white and half Indian. They were Booth, B-O-O-T-H. And so Big Mama had a great spirit and had people working for her, etc. But she sent her three kids to college farming. There were 5 historically black colleges in the area where we grew up, 2 in Marshall, Texas, which was Bishop and Wiley. And you had Texas and Butler College in Tyler. And you had Jarvis Christian College in Hawkins, and they were all related to the church. Butler and Bishop were Baptists, and Wiley and Texas, I think, were Methodists, and Jarvis was a Christian college as well. So the African American churches supported those colleges, and I learned over time that my grandmother paid tuition by supplying the food and vegetables for them to feed the students in the dorm. So she would barter, giving them the fruit and vegetables to help pay tuition. So it's interesting, how that all evolved. So my father, was a college graduate, but his entrepreneurship was really the farm in terms of his ability to do things, because he really couldn't borrow money and do things. But we always had 25, 30 cows. We grew everything we ate. I thought we were probably the poorest people in the world, but and looking at those particular standards, we were considered well off compared to the other African Americans in the area, because we were landowners, and Daddy, taught school. He also was a football coach and basketball, but he never really got paid to do that. They never got money to do those particular aspects of their job, but that's what he was really committed to doing. And in addition to the schooling part, that we were very, very strong in religion. Sunday school and church was at the highlight of everything every week, and so we were taught good moral Christian values and the value of hard work. The farm we would grow. We would have corn, grow corn for the cows, and we had hay and everything you would eat. It was all fresh, and we had a deep freeze where you put everything there that you wanted to eat. And I hated the farm, but looking back on it in retrospect, every lesson I learned there, and I would summarize it in what I call the pinto bean story. So everybody's had pinto beans, or if you're in Mexican American, the refried beans, etc. But if you take that bean and put it in the ground, what happens to it? What will happen to it? Well, it will die there if it's down there for a while, and at some point, a little plant will grow out, bud out of the ground, and then you'll have a little plant. And so over time, if the sun shines and it rains, etc., the plant will grow, and then you'll get a little bloom on the plant. And then once you get a bloom, the bees will pollinate the bloom, and then you'll get a bean. And so it's a green bean, and the green bean that most people have is a long green bean that we eat. But this bean is green, and it's a little short. It's about like that size. And so we would eat that bean fresh, and we would plant an acre or two of those beans, and then we would pick the beans and put them in bags so that we would have fresh beans in the winter. And so in a good year, it would rain again, and you get another bloom. And then after the second bloom, my father would say, well, leave that one alone, let it fill out. And then when it fills out, you develop a green pinto bean. And so most people have never eaten a green pinto bean. So we would eat those fresh, and then we would shell them and put some in the deep freeze too. So now you have two beans to eat in the winter. And then the foul part of the bean is what most people know as the pinto bean. So you let the green one, leave it alone, you let it, the one inside fill out, and then you let it dry. And then that's the pinto bean that most people eat. And so, and then once we got that bean, then Daddy would put some of them in the smokehouse. You keep the weevils out of them so nothing would get in them, and then you'd have pinto beans in the winter. Now you don't have to freeze that bean because it's just a good, it's just a good bean. Now the most important part of that is he would always say, well, we're gonna put some over here in the other smokehouse so that we'll have some seed to replant in February, March when you replant again. So that bean is a cycle of life. It keeps keep producing, if that makes sense. And so that's kind of how we are as individuals in terms of what are we producing, in our lives in terms of our service and the community and helping and as the Great Commission in the Bible said, go ye therefore and serve and teach and preach and help one another. And so if the good book said that he would provide for you, then that's how he provides, through that bean, if that makes sense. So now I constantly like to use that as an analogy because everybody's probably eating a pinto bean. Everybody knows what that is, but they may not necessarily know where it comes from, and that bean continues to provide because God is in control.
Okay, so now that's an excellent analogy of life cycle. And so at what point in your life did you get the idea that you wanted to be a doctor and especially choose the profession of podiatry?
Okay. Before I answer that, I'll bring you up real quickly. The area where I grew up, there were 7 communities, rural, and they all had a church, and they all had a school. And but there was a big political issue dealing with consolidation. And so J.C. Beckworth was the minister at the little church where we lived in. Smith Chapel was the name of our little church and school. So in 1956, all of those, he was able to get all those communities to come together to consolidate to have one school. And they built a brand new school, and he called it Mayflower Elementary and High School. And it was, I think, because of the Mayflower and the struggles and all of that, in terms of how he decided to name it that. And there was a black school in Tatum, and that was a Professor Pollard. And so I was in the first class when I integrated my high school in 1968. And about 20 years later, my oldest brother, became the principal of the high school. And so he spent a long career there. So he had access to the old school board minutes. So he was writing a history of Mayflower, and it had in the board minutes that they were feuding when they was trying to decide would it be Professor Beckworth or Professor Pollard who would be the principal of this new school. But the school board voted to build this new school. They had a bond issue, and it passed, and they built the new school in '56. And right as the school was opening, after they was building it, someone came one night and started shooting down through the community. And they shot at my grandmother's house, and she was on her knees praying, and she had one of those beds that had a post, and it hit the post and ricocheted off. They drove about another 2 miles down the road, and it was Mr. Bubba Thompson who drove one of the school buses. They shot in his house. They didn't hit anybody, and then they turned left, and it's about 12 miles or 13 miles to Longview. And they drove up Highway 149, State Highway 149, and there was a guy named Grady Green at a barbecue place that had a jukebox, and the people go in there and dance. And they shot in there, and they killed a guy named John Earl Reese. So he's the only person in Texas on the Civil Rights Memorial there in Montgomery. And so that made the national news. And so Northeastern University, a lot of the civil rights issues, crimes that didn't get solved, there were law students that was working on that. So about 4 years ago, I can't remember the person's name, but they actually came and investigated that. And so now they have a memorial there for John Earl at the school. And it's like a national shrine there, and so that would be healing. And the district judge, they really didn't do anything to those people, but there's been some reconciliation so that you could reach closure on that. So that's a huge page in history of Texas and my community, because my grandmother, when she died, had all these articles from the Houston Chronicle and the Dallas Morning News where they came and covered that incident, back in the 50s. And my aunt, who died about 3 years ago, had even more things in the paper than even my grandmother had. So it was very, very interesting.
So I'd like to reiterate the situation where it was during segregation times, and so when the bond issue passed for you guys to have the school that was elementary and high school, then there were some people that opposed that for African Americans having their own school, and so you had to live through that time. So kind of elaborate a little bit more on that for us, please.
Yeah, well, the things were segregated, and there were some people that was really upset that they were building a school for African Americans, and our school, building a new school would be better than the one that the white students had. Yeah, and so because of that, that was the backlash as related to that, and that's why that little uprising and the guys going around shooting and the person getting killed in that process. Yeah, that was I guess modus operandi in terms of why that took place. Yeah, in that regard. So that's part of the legacy, and the fact that my brother was there in school administration, and the Northeastern University in Boston, the law students came down. They were able to bring that together and talk about that with the students today, so that there's history and understanding about what went on. And because if we don't remember history, it'll repeat itself as it relates to those issues. And I think we're even looking at some of those things today, in terms of the times we live in now as it relates to history. The other question you asked me about was deciding to go into medicine, etc. But before I do that, we'll lead into that. The most important point was what Mayflower School, what was Mayflower High School, elementary and high school. Well, with those 7 communities, they have 7 school buses, and Professor Beckworth, the principal, his philosophy was that we were the best at whatever we were doing. And so they instill that you could learn, pride, and excellence every day. And I just remember I was in interscholastic league in spelling and debate, and he would tell you all the time. He said, "I'll tell you that Larry Harkless is the best speller in the United States of America." Well, they told us that every day, and that's what we believed. And I don't know nobody I grew up with that was not a good citizen. When we integrated to high school in 1968, there were 24 African Americans in my class, and the graduating class was 42. So you can see we had more than there were whites at that time, and there were 12 African Americans that graduated from college out of that class. So that tells you
Yeah, that was a high percentile in
actually,
comparison at that particular time in the U.S. So the education played a major part, and then positive reinforcement.
well, that was the expectation that you would go to college, have a trade or whatever, and that you would be a good citizen in terms of the civics and your moral duty to serve your community. I think that was instilled in everybody at every level. So students that weren't as academically smart, played football or basketball or sports. Everybody did something where they had value and self-worth and believed that they could do. And so I don't remember anybody going to prison. I mean, not that we were perfect individuals, none of us are, but it was just a great community. And as I said, all those communities had churches that were large families, and then everybody worked and helped each other. There was something going on in some community, and people didn't have things or whatever. Daddy would always take food or whatever that was that people needed. If someone needed some hay or whatever, they took it over there.
Yeah.
So we learned that growing up. It was all about service and helping one another.
And a sense of community,
Absolutely.
where everybody knows their neighbors and so on and so forth. That's very important. So today, people don't even know their neighbors, and then that makes a disconnect in the community. So people, their sensitivity to their neighbor is not necessarily there now because of social media and things like that, right?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, as it's often said that it takes a village to raise a child. It takes everybody. So if you stepped out of line wherever you were, those 7 communities, everybody knew everybody, and so somebody was going to see you and tell your mother or somebody, and you would get disciplined. So you knew you had to do the right things, etc. And so it was the extended community, and also the teachers cared. It's a difference in teaching, but teaching the whole child and the whole student. I think you had the more comprehensiveness in that regard, and even the students that weren't the top academic, I still believe that they got the best out of whatever they had in terms of their academic achievement and preparation. And so as a result, they got good jobs in the industry where they could move up and become the foremans and different things in whatever they were doing. And so when I go home now, I mean, it's amazing that everybody has been very, very successful. Now you got grandkids, kids have grandkids and great grandkids. It's just amazing. We just had a reunion for Thanksgiving. And I think there's about 150, 200 people there that had gone to school from 56 to 70 to the 20 years that the school was open before it integrated, in that regard. And the community is still a very viable community, but again, people leave, they don't come back, and so my mother's 93, and there's nobody for her to talk to now because everybody's has died out, but that foundation is still there in terms of the love, the sense of community, and the sense of well-being that was developed. So also what happened, so from a school perspective, we had a chemistry teacher named Mr. Maurice Mills, but he also coached football. But he was really a great teacher, and he was teaching us college stuff even in that little black school. And we were doing half-lives and just all kind of things. And he was telling us he wanted us to be a PhD and you could go to medical school, and he would talk about all of that. And so I didn't go to college necessarily wanting to be a doctor. I was going to be a math major. I don't know necessarily what I wanted to do with math, but that's what I went to do. Now in the little school, the highest math class we had was trigonometry. We didn't have calculus. So when I went to North Texas State University to college, and so they would not let me take calculus because I had not had it, so they told me I had to take college algebra. So I took college algebra my first semester, my first year in college, the fall of 1968, and I was barely passing algebra. I was barely making a C. And I had two roommates from Prairie View. That daddy was a professor there, and these guys were like straight A students. And one of them had the same teacher in an analytical geometry class, and he was kind of struggling. And he said the guy was kind of crazy that I should drop the algebra class, but I didn't. So I ended up getting a C. But from a reality check, saying, well, if I only can make a C in algebra, maybe I should change my major. It shouldn't be math. However, I took trigonometry the next semester, and I made an A. So I said, well, maybe I'm not as bad as I thought I was. But the second semester, my first year in college, the spring of 1969, I pledged Omega Psi Phi fraternity, and I was in the first charter line. There were 23 African Americans who were charter members of the fraternity, and I had never seen any guys that sharp and smart. They were all on the dean's list. They were all in leadership within the university. And so when I was pledging, the head of the fraternity said, Harkless said, you making A's in biology and chemistry, you can be a doctor. And I said, really? So it was after, they would talk about that all the time when we was pledging. And so that made me really, really think about it. So after I finished my first year, I had like a C+ average. And so I told my mother I was interested in medicine. So in Longview, there was, actually there was two black doctors. There was a family doctor named Dr. Cleaver, and then there was Dr. Willis, who was a podiatrist, a foot doctor. So my mother told me to go see Dr. Willis. He would tell me what I needed to do. Now, my mother didn't know anything about the difference in the degrees, whether it was MD, DO, osteopathic physician, DPM, which is a podiatrist. She didn't know anything about that. She just knew Dr. Willis was a doctor. So I visited Dr. Willis, and he was from Selma, Alabama, 16 kids, great podiatrist, and I loved what he did, so I wanted to be Dr. Willis. And that's when Ben Casey was the big TV show in Madison on regular TV. So so my second semester, my second year in college, my grades were, still good in science and all of that. I wasn't working hard in English and history and all of that, so I started working hard where I could make A's and all of that. So the last 4 semesters I was in college, I was on the dean's list, and I was taking the hardest chemistry and biology, etc. And then I applied to go to podiatric medical school the fall of 1970, because most people think you have to have a degree to go to medical school, but you do not. You can actually go to medical school with 90 hours if you have the grade point average and you score high enough on the medical college admission test, the METCAT.
So you're talking about 90 hours of clinical hours?
90 hours of going to college. So you need 120 to graduate. So
so how many units is that?
Well, it was just hours. These are hours. So you need 4 years. You take 30 hours every year to graduate. So 4 times 3, that's 120 hours to get a degree in a college. I don't know about the units. I'm sure there's some comparable in terms of how they compute that.
And so then you take the entry exam.
Yeah. So after my 90 hours, my fall of my junior year, I decided I would consider going to podiatric medical school. So I applied, and I got an interview in Houston at the Sheraton Lincoln Hotel. The American Public Health Association meeting was there. So I borrowed my brother's car. He was on a football scholarship at the University of Texas at Arlington. So I could borrow his car, and a couple of my fraternity brothers, we drove to Houston one Saturday night for a Sunday morning interview like 9 o'clock. So I ended up getting accepted in January of January 71. And so I needed 15 hours to graduate. But they told me that if I would come, that they would give me a BS after my first 2 years of medical school. So I left. I didn't finish North Texas. So most people think that even today, you can go to medical school without a degree. Most people get a degree, but you can save a year if you're smart and have the academic credentials to be competitive and become accepted.
That's interesting.
Right. And then most of the time, if you do it correctly, wherever you go to medical school, you can create an articulation agreement where they will still give you a degree from your college. Because I didn't know anything about that and didn't think about it, but after I finished up my residency and moved back to Texas, I decided I wanted a degree from North Texas. And so I wrote the chancellor and told him I wanted him to give me a degree because I was a doctor. But too much time had expired for them to do that. I think they were seriously considering it.
Yeah.
if that makes sense.
Yes, it does.
So, but if you let them know that you're doing that, then you could create an articulation with that once you finish your first 2 years of medical school, where they'll give you a degree, your degree that you needed.
Your bachelor's degree.
Yeah, that's right. That's exactly right.
That's excellent.
Right.
Yeah, that's some powerful information right there.
Yeah. So I decided that I worked at a bank to go get through college in Denton, Texas. That's about 35 miles north of Dallas on Interstate 35. And so I told her, I used to do the mail and all the flunky work. And all the tellers, everybody liked me. So I told them I was going to be a podiatrist. And so one of them told me that there was a podiatrist in town that banked there. So next time he came, she was going to call me so I could meet him. And so she did. And I used to clear checks. There was 2 other banks in town, so I would go out and clear checks with them. Also, I drive the bank car. And so one day I was out clearing checks. I stopped by his office, and I knew where the schools were at, before you had internet or anything like that. But they were all on the East Coast, and there was only one school in a kind of a warm climate. It was in San Francisco. So I said, well, I'm not going where any snow or anything, so I'm going to California. And so I applied to San Francisco, and that's where I ended up getting accepted. So I matriculated in the August of 1971. I left Texas and moved to San Francisco. Dr. Armstrong called me maybe 6 months ago and told me that I had been chosen to receive the Almost Award. Indeed, an honor. The individuals who have received the award have contributed an enormous amount to the knowledge and teaching, research, education aspect of the diabetic foot. And I believe I've worked hard and contributed also, so it's always good to be honored and recognized for your work. The most important thing is knowing your gift and working hard and contributing. And so I believe that, as Dr. Bolton has mentioned, that my gift is education and teaching, and I had energy and drive, and working in a health science center, I had the opportunity to learn and grow and see how education and research was taking place there. And to be successful, you had to do research and teaching and everything. And so I'm a team player, so I understand how to get the right people on the team. And because of that, I had Dr. Armstrong and every other great people, and we accomplished a lot. And to me, that's kind of what life is planting seeds and growing fruit and being patient in the work. And so I'm honored, and I think the testament is that if you continue to work, you'll get recognized and you'll move up. It may not come when you want it, but it always happens. Probably not on my watch, but probably on God's watch. Thank you.